Just so you know, this show is about scary stuff. So don't say I didn't warn you guys. And remember, don't be scared.
Episode 120, Oxford Part 2. War Baby here with another episode of Murderous Minors. Hey lovelies, let's start out this episode with an answer to a question I know is on your minds, and yes, 14-year-old Abel Acosta remains on the run from Garland, Texas. Latest reports on the Texaco triple murder case also indicate that the teen's father, 33-year-old Richard Acosta Jr., was indicted by a grand jury in Dallas County for capital murder of multiple persons. He remains in the Dallas County Jail on $3 million bond. Call Crime Stoppers at 1-972-272-8477 if you know where Abel Acosta is. In other ongoing news, the community of Oxford, Michigan continues to deal with the aftermath of the shooting at their high school that killed 4 and injured 7 on November 30th, 2021. This case is precedent-setting, as never before have the parents of an alleged school shooter been arrested alongside the child for playing a part in the murders. We'll be following the Oxford High School shooting case very closely, as what happens here could have serious future repercussions for parents across the country. It will also be interesting to see whether a deterrent like this could lead to a decrease in juvenile crime. They've all recently been in court, and more in-depth details on many aspects of the case have been made public through the testimonies of people who were actually involved, moving all 3 Crumbleys closer to trial and the families and survivors of the massacre one day closer to trying to get on with their lives. Alleged shooter Ethan Crumbley, age 15, was caught on school security cameras exiting a bathroom with a handgun drawn before opening fire on the school hallway full of students and staff. Tate Myre, 16, Hana St. Juliana, 14, Justin Shilling, 17, and Madisyn Baldwin, also 17, were killed in the attack. Crumbley was arrested at the school 47 minutes after the shooting had begun, and he was charged as an adult the following day, December 1st, 2021. The 24 total counts include 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of terrorism, 12 counts of possession of a firearm while committing a felony, and 7 counts assault with the intent to murder for the 6 students and 1 teacher he'd shot but who'd survived. He's pleaded not guilty and is being held without bond. In early January 2022, the teen waived his preliminary hearing, sending his case directly on to trial, and the defense indicated that this case could actually end with Crumbley pleading guilty. His attorney said that they'd waive the hearing because they were certain that enough evidence existed to warrant being bound over for trial. A few weeks later, on January 27, 2022, the defense filed a notice of intent to pursue an insanity defense, which has basically brought any movement in proceedings to a standstill while extensive examinations are completed to determine his criminal responsibility. The teen is now subject to examinations by the Michigan Center for Forensic Psychiatry, who his defense attorney has said is, quote, jammed with work. The judge will ultimately decide if the planned defense will happen after all the evaluations have been reported. If he were to put forward the defense and was found not guilty, Crumbley would likely be sent to the Michigan State Psychiatric Hospital for further examination to determine the outcome of his case. Crumbley's parents were also arrested in connection with the Oxford High School shooting after evidence indicated that they had purchased the 9mm handgun that their son allegedly used to kill his classmates. All three Crumbleys have been in court in February 2022, with Ethan Crumbley's hearing on the 22nd, the second monthly hearing required under Michigan law for juveniles being held in adult jail. New legislation went into effect on December 21, 2021, and the teen had hearings on January 21st and February 22nd to address recent motions to transfer him from the Oakland County Jail to the juvenile facility. 3 witnesses testified for the state and commented on topics like the difference in education opportunities and which facility can better control Crumbley's contact with the public. In jail, he's being sequestered as they don't have appropriate means to house a juvenile there. Their only recourse is to separate him. There aren't any formal education classes available to him like he'd have access to at the Children's Village. He instead has access to a shared iPad and can have 2 pieces of reading material at one time. He's currently reading Harry Potter. The teen can use his email on the iPad as well as play games and watch movies. It was noted that though he entered custody with nothing in his commissary account, he now has, quote, pretty excessive funds on his books. In the state's opening statement, Assistant Prosecutor Markeisha Washington said that, quote, despite having no documented juvenile history, the defendant's antisocial behavior is very concerning. The evidence will show that despite the defendant's biological age, he discussed topics and interests well beyond that of an average 15-year-old. In a text thread with his friend and in his journal, he outlined a plan to stalk, rape, torture, and ultimately kill a female classmate. He expressed delight in torturing a family of baby birds, and he wrote about the joy he received in listening to them squeal as he killed them. He spoke of his adoration of Adolf Hitler and Jeffrey Dahmer, specifically stating when you die, you need to be remembered for a long time by doing something that will make people think of you until time ends. In his journal, he described the type of gun he needed, who his first victim would be, and ultimately he expressed that he would surrender so that he could witness the pain and suffering that he caused. To place this defendant with other at-risk juveniles who are presumably the same age as his victims would be contrary to the rehabilitation of those at Children's Village and pose a potential risk of harm to their safety. He bragged about wearing a mask to the public. He enjoyed his dark side. The defendant isn't who he appears to be. When the defendant committed these premeditated murders on November 30th, he did so with the intent to be remembered, to terrorize the community, and to gain recognition. The state alleges that texts and statements from a friend indicate that he'd shared some of his plans, including the desire to stalk a classmate so he could rape, torture, and murder her. His friend allegedly also had violent thoughts, and the two shared them with each other. His journal contained other disturbing thoughts and also shed insight on his relationship with his parents. Crumbley's defense attorney said in her opening statements that, quote, there are a number of other things that the court must look at. I believe the evidence will show that in the time leading up to these events that my client was hallucinating, that he was seeing things, that he was hearing voices, that he was not sleeping. He was extremely anxious and he asked his parents to see a therapist. The defense didn't call any witnesses to the stand. The state called 3 witnesses during the hearing, an inmate caseworker from the Oakland County Jail who currently assesses the teen's mental health status. The manager of Oakland County Children's Village also took the stand, calling the facility a, quote, child-caring campus for youth and referring to it as understaffed. A sheriff's captain who supervises the day-to-day operations at the Oakland County Jail testified too, explaining that there are a total of 2 minors being held at the jail, both housed separately in the jail clinic. Crumbley is currently on what they call behavior watch, where a deputy assesses the teen every 15 minutes. He stated that Crumbley has access to education through the iPad and the online Khan Academy, and opined that overall he felt as though the teen's needs are being met in jail. Following testimony from the 3 prosecution witnesses, the state said in their closing, quote, "The evidence presented to you during this hearing shows a deeper and more calculated mind than any 15-year-old. The evidence shows what he's capable of thinking, concealing, and doing when he's ready." In one of his texts, he tells his friend that he's so glad they can talk to one another and not let their, quote, masks slip. The defendant appreciates that his friend is, quote, the one person who is as fucked up as me and shares it. "The scary thing is I like being this fucked up." One page of the teen's journal reads, quote, "First off, I got my gun. Second, the shooting is tomorrow. I have access to the gun and ammo." And the prosecutor emphasized that Crumbley enlisted, quote, his own father to get him a 9mm gun because that particular weapon is more desirable to maximize the number of people killed. He contemplated the pros and cons of going out in a blaze of glory at the end of this all, but neither of those he expressed would satisfy his desire to be remembered forever. He knows that he's going to have people who admire him and people who hate him alike, and he wants that notoriety. This is not a person you should put in a place of having contact with and potential to influence other juveniles, much less juveniles our courts have already determined to be at risk. The journal was located inside the bathroom and included 21 pages. Page 6 has help in bold written on it, along with, quote, "I have zero help for my mental problems, and it's causing me to shoot up the fucking school." On another page, he'd written, quote, "I will kill everyone I fucking see." Another passage on the same page reads, quote, "I will cause the biggest school shooting in Michigan's history. I have fully mentally lost it after years of fighting with my dark side. My parents won't listen to me about help or a therapist." Judge Kwame Rowe released his decision on March 1st, 2022, denying the request to move Crumbley out of the Oakland County Jail, citing multiple escapes at Children's Village as proof that they aren't capable of handling a high-profile pre-trial defendant such as the alleged Oxford High School shooter. 38 out of 60 spots at the children's facility are open, and none of the juveniles being held there are on murder charges. The judge pointed out that the teen has been on the internet, quote, "actively communicating with the public, sometimes several times a day, and that he hasn't expressed any concerns about his mental health to anyone throughout these exchanges or in communications he's had with others while incarcerated." Judge Rowe reviewed the witness testimony plus 3 videos and 18 exhibits, including texts and journal entries, saying, quote, "This court reviewed excerpts from defendant's journal. Defendant describes that he had created Molotov cocktails and had started a small fire in the woods. Further, he described that he may use the Molotov cocktails during the school shooting. Lastly, the court will note that prior to the alleged incident, in his journal, defendant noted that he killed 8 infant baby birds by slowly torturing them until death. This court reviewed People's Exhibit 5, which indeed shows defendant torturing a baby bird to death. His, quote, "prior delinquent acts are of grave concern to this court, and that his presence at Children's Village may have a, quote, negative impact on other juveniles' progress toward rehabilitation." He went on to say that, quote, "This court cannot find that the juvenile would be safely detained at Children's Village. It's clear that Children's Village is incapable of safely housing this defendant because of the unique circumstances this case represents. The nature and circumstances of the alleged offense are extremely troubling and disturbing. The court is placing great weight on this factor. The people allege that defendant planned and executed a mass murder at Oxford High School. Allegedly, he killed 4 students and injured 7 others. The alleged facts speak for themselves, and there is no need to analyze further." The judge did tell the jail they'd need to find a place to confine Crumbley that was away from the adult population but that did not have a 24-hour light, as does his current cell. He set the next review hearing on Crumbley's placement for March 24th, 2022. His parents, Jennifer and James Crumbley, were in court for their preliminary hearing in February, and evidence was laid out to determine if this case should proceed to trial. The couple is charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter each and are being held in the Oakland County Jail along with their son, though they aren't allowed to have contact with one another. Prosecutors allege that the couple should have intervened when he asked for help, but failed to do so. Last month, in January 2022, the judge denied their request to reduce their bonds to $100,000 and they remain set at $500,000 each. It was after that hearing that the couple were reprimanded for communicating in court after they were seen blowing kisses and mouthing "I love you" during their Zoom hearing. They were scheduled for their preliminary hearing on February 8, 2022, but just days before, the defense asked for more time to review the discovery evidence or to limit witness testimony. The prosecution was planning to call 30 witnesses, which the defense would need to meet with their clients about but couldn't because of the pandemic protocols at the jail. There were also thousands of pictures, tens of thousands of texts and social media messages, and over 70 hours of video they still needed to review, however their request was denied. The Crumbleys' preliminary hearing began as scheduled on February 8th before concluding and restarting 2 weeks later on February 24, 2022. Testimony on the first day included one of Jennifer Crumbley's co-workers at a real estate office who said that she had told her there were issues in her marriage and that both spouses were cheating and thinking about separating. The woman testified that Jennifer Crumbley's boyfriend would sometimes pick her up from the office at lunch, but that after taking an anniversary trip, the Crumbleys reconciled. She also testified that the teen's mother would talk about his only friend moving, and that she was scared he'd be lonely, and that every day after work, Jennifer Crumbley headed directly to check on her horses at their stables. The state was trying to show that the Crumbleys were preoccupied with their own lives and paying no attention to their son's mental health needs, even though it is evident that he repeatedly asked them for help. The state presented many instances where the teen had texted his mother and said that the house was haunted or someone else was there, dating back to March 2021, highlighting the fact that she'd never answered or acknowledged these texts at all. A message between the teen and his friend from April 2021 said that due to him describing his hallucinations, quote, "Now my mom thinks I take drugs. She thinks that's the reason why I'm so mad and sad all the time, and she doesn't worry about my mental health. They make me feel like I'm the problem. My mom makes everyone feel like a piece of shit." In a different text, he told his friend, quote, "I need help. I actually asked my dad to take me to the doctor yesterday, but he gave me some pills and told me to suck it up. Like, it's at the point where I'm asking to go to the doctor. My mom laughed when I told her." The prosecution also called the owner of the horse stables, who testified that she couldn't remember hearing Jennifer Crumbley saying anything good about her son, but that she did say he didn't do the same things as other kids. She said that right after the shootings at the high school, Jennifer Crumbley texted her saying that she needed to sell her horses fast. Her boss testified that she'd texted him on the night of the shootings, asking him not to fire her or judge her for what her son had done, but not exhibiting any concern about her son or the students he was alleged to have shot, which he found surprising. When the hearing continued on February 24, 2022, the counselor who had called the Crumbleys to come to the high school for a meeting took the stand to testify about the events leading up to the day of the shootings. He said that weeks before the attack, at the beginning of November 2021, he'd gotten an email from Crumbley's Spanish teacher saying that he seemed sad. The counselor testified that he checked in with the teen, waiting for him after class and telling him that he was there if Crumbley needed someone to talk to. The student simply replied okay, and they had no further contact until the end of November, on the day before the shootings. That was the day that the teen had been observed looking at ammunition on his cell phone. The counselor testified that they'd met for roughly 5 minutes with school administrators and that he'd been present as support for the student. Crumbley explained that shooting was a hobby and that he and his mother had just gone to a gun range over the weekend. The teen said that he knew that this was, quote, "school inappropriate behavior." He was sent back to class and a voicemail was left for the student's mother. The following day, November 30th, the counselor received another email from one of Crumbley's teachers who said that she had seen a drawing of a gun and some disturbing statements written on his math worksheet in class. He'd also been watching, quote, a video game shooting on his phone during class. The counselor testified that he went and got Crumbley from class and set a meeting for them with the dean of students and the teen's parents, saying that, quote, I did have concern about the student because it was a couple of messages in a couple of days. The purpose of the meeting was to find out what our next steps would be. My concern was that I wanted to make sure he was okay. Crumbley initially told the school administrators that both of the things he had done were in relation to a video game he was going to design, but when they brought up the phrases he'd written that included, quote, my life is useless, the world is dead, and the thoughts won't stop, he became visibly sad. The counselor testified that, quote, his demeanor then changed. He became sad. He started pausing more in his speech. He then described some things that had happened recently in his life. He talked about how the family dog had died. He talked about how he'd lost a grandparent, that COVID had been incredibly difficult for him. He talked about a friend who had left and wasn't able to attend school anymore. The counselor sent Jennifer Crumbley a picture of the worksheet and spoke to her on speakerphone with the teen present, saying he'd just done a suicide assessment on the teen and felt that Crumbley was showing enough signs of suicidal ideation to cause concern. When he asked the teen if he felt like he was a threat to himself or others, he said he wasn't, and the counselor testified that, quote, his statement back to me was, I can see why this looks bad and I'm not going to do anything. He said the Crumbleys arrived at about 10:30 a.m. and the counselor noticed that they didn't hug their son when they arrived or even greet him, saying, quote, it was different than other meetings I've seen. They weren't friendly or showing care to the student, their son. He said that he told the parents he was concerned about their son's behavior and that they needed to take him home and find someone for him to talk to. He provided them with a list of mental health resources. Jennifer Crumbley said that she had to go back to work and would need more than 2 days to fulfill his request. He testified that, quote, I was a little bit taken aback by that. When the parents stated that they could not take their student home that day, my statement was, I want him seen within 48 hours. I didn't have a reason to believe it wouldn't happen. I didn't feel 100% confident that it would. I have never had parents arrive at the school and not take their student home. I wrote him a pass to go to class and told him I just want you to know I care about you. I cared about him in that moment particularly. I thought it was a really rough situation to be showing signs of needing help, of needing support, and it felt like he got the opposite. He conferred with the dean, who was in the meeting, about whether there was a disciplinary reason that could force the Crumbleys to take their son home with them, but he was told no. He recalled on the stand that the meeting lasted about 15 minutes, during which time Jennifer Crumbley never spoke directly to her son, and that it ended when she'd asked, quote, are we done? He also stated that Crumbley's backpack, which is thought to have contained the gun, was delivered to him when his math class ended and while he was in the meeting. The Crumbleys' messages between each other were also examined, and they never spoke about their son's mental health or about getting him the help he repeatedly asked for, nor did they discuss the gun, Ethan taking the gun to school or shooting anyone at any time. They also weren't aware that he had tortured the baby birds and kept one of their heads in a jar in his bedroom, which he'd texted his friend about before, saying, quote, holy shit, my mom almost found the bird head. That jar was also found in the school bathroom after the shootings, along with his backpack and journal. Judge Julie Nicholson issued her decision after testimony had ended on February 24, 2022, stating that, quote, the court finds that the deaths of the 4 victims could have been avoided if James and Jennifer Crumbley exercised ordinary care and diligence in the care of their son. There was extensive testimony that Ethan Crumbley was certainly a troubled young man and that they had knowledge of that situation, but they purchased a gun which he believed was his and that he was free to use. They've waived their arraignment and their next scheduled appearance will be March 15th, 2022, their pretrial conference. Trial is expected to begin later this year and their son could be called to testify. However, they can't testify against each other, not because of spousal privilege, which would apply if they were being tried separately, but because they're being tried together. At trial, the prosecution will have to show causation, that James and Jennifer Crumbley's gross negligence directly led to Ethan Crumbley's alleged actions. In December, the parents of a student who was shot in the neck and her sister who was right by her filed 2 suits against the school district, seeking $100 million each in damages. That suit names the superintendent, Oxford High School's dean of students, their principal, 2 teachers, a staff member, and 2 counselors, and alleges that, quote, the individually named defendants are each responsible through their actions for making the student victims less safe. The latest suit was filed on behalf of several students' families, including Tate Myre's, who was killed, 2 sisters who hid in their class during the attack, and another student who was hiding in the bathroom stall with Justin Shilling right before he was shot to death. According to the student's father, quote, he was in that bathroom for 5 minutes. He was in there with a shooter who had just killed, wounded, injured. Justin gave him a plan that if we get a chance, we will run. He called them out one by one, and Justin happened to be the first. His son got the chance to run soon after. The student's mother said he's still traumatized and that, quote, he's nowhere near going back to class, let alone functioning like a normal 15-year-old child. We have to check doors. We have to check under beds. The suit names as defendants Ethan Crumbley, James and Jennifer Crumbley, 3 Oxford High School teachers, 2 counselors, and the dean of students, and is seeking at least $25,000 in damages. Tate Myre's father said, quote, we're sad and heartbroken. Our lives forever changed. Our family will never be the same. We're not doing good. All we do is walk around the house and think about Tate. We think about him every day. We sit in his room. We listen to his playlist off Spotify. We're not doing good, but we're going to find a way to get through it together.